Okay, thank you, Graham and Steve. Now we have question period, and I'm gonna go through probably 20 questions or so from that were submitted. And so I hope that it's kind of like a frequently asked questions list and takes care of some of the immediate concerns. So the first question I want to get to is, does the province know what's going on? So I'm going to pick on our provincial representatives that are in the audience and get them to stand up for a second. So yes, they're here, and they've been here at every community meeting, and they are listening to what's going on, and they have, a few meetings ago, they were here in full force, so they have the equivalent of the local recovery team on the provincial side, and so they're in communication with the local recovery team, as well as interacting directly and listening to the meetings.
Can you tell us who they are?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Hi, I'm Jim Guido. I'm on secondment for this Grand Forks flood recovery. A couple days a week, I'm out of Castlegar, but I'm here at least once every second week, more than likely one day of each week. So I'm the liaison between what we call team government, the regional operations out of Cranbrook, the lands department, the water department, the habitat department, and so I'm liaising with that group of people in Cranbrook and Nelson and locally as well, liaising with this group and with the municipalities in the regional district. So general questions that you've got for government, I can sort of triage and send you to people that might be able to answer your specific questions. General answers I'll be able to give. Come and see me if you want a business card and if you want to talk to me.
That's a bit for that too. And I'll just expand again around the extent of the provincial involvement. So at the provincial level in Victoria, the provincial recovery team is being led by an assistant deputy minister, I believe. Dave Peterson, or is he deputy? So he's an assistant deputy minister, so they've got a pretty senior person dedicated to this. Plus, the deputy ministers have got a council, if you will, that comes together very regularly and speaks to this every week. They get updates. Plus, we're on the phone call with a bunch of the deputy ministers and assistant deputy ministers every Thursday morning at 8:30 and so on and so forth. So there's very regular engagement from the Victoria side. Thanks.
Okay, I'm Christine Anderson. I work with water, so Jim mentioned part of the group that he helps support is the water department, so that's who I am. I've been brought in for a 4 or 5 month secondment to help out with any of the changes in and about streams, so any of the bank erosion protection work, or trying to understand where the jurisdiction is in the permitting side of that. And so I know I'm here for a couple of days right now. I'm going out to a couple of properties and being able to talk to people that have either got applications in or are looking to put applications in, working closely with the Kettle River Watershed Authority to be able to get some of that information, who needs to have that extra advice or extra, just even sometimes just an ear to figure out what do I have to do in this situation. So that's my role. But yeah, you're welcome to ask me about any of the Section 11, Section 10 Water Sustainability Act provincial regulations. And you can also talk to Jim, and he'll certainly redirect you over to me.
I'm Lindsay Eastwood. I'm with Emergency Management BC out of Nelson office, but like Jim, I'm here at least every other week for these meetings and other meetings. And my biggest role is just to listen to everything that this community has to say and push it upstream in Emergency Management BC. So most of the recovery is being covered by team government that Jim is liaising for. But Emergency Management BC still has a piece. We did a lot of the response work, and there is still some recovery piece that we're working on. And basically I'm taking everything that I hear from all of you and from the local team and from team government, informing some best practices, things that we can learn and things that we can improve moving forward from the Emergency Management BC side of things. So I love hearing comments from any of you. You can come see me after as well, share your stories. let me know how they think, how this is affecting you, so that I can push that up on the Emergency Management BC side of things.
Thank you. I'm Gina Burrows. I'm the government agent here in Grand Forks. I am effectively your boots on the ground with the province. I liaise with all these teams, and I sit in on meetings that feed into higher levels to make sure that nothing's lost in the translation. Because I've run an office that was affected. I'm also aware from the business side of things how this flood is affecting Grand Forks. And I also wear many hats in the community, so I'm able to provide a little bit more of that local input back into the provincial government. And that's what I do. And I interface with you at Service BC, and you're welcome to come see me anytime.
Okay, thank you to our provincial government reps that are here tonight. So another big question is, what's the plan for next year? We're talking about 2 to 4 years before we have any permanent solutions. So what's going to happen next year? And last time we went over how essentially we're going to do a bigger, better plan that we had in this year. We have tons of experience from what happened. We know what worked, we know what didn't work. And so focusing on the communication side of things next year, as well as knowing that, yes, we can deploy Tiger dams. We can get some of these emergency flood protection measures in place quicker and do a better job of that. So I don't know if anyone wants to add to that, or if we want to just take questions on that during, for specifics during the next question period here. There are a number of questions about other options for flood protection. And if you can imagine me impersonating Don Dobson, because he's the ultimate knowledge on this, but nonetheless, he did answer these questions. So on the dredging, the analogy there is that the river is not only water, but it's gravel. So it's a constant flow of gravel moving downriver towards the ocean. Any dredging that happens in the river will ultimately be filled in, and the estimate from Don Dobson for how long that would take in a high flow rate flood event, it could be hours or it could be a day, but essentially we're looking at an ineffective long-term solution, and one that would have to be done every few years in order to be any sort of solution. The question about why don't we just dam the Granby River? And the answer to that one is that the sheer amount of water that would be required to be behind storage would need a dam that was way taller than anything that was ever built there, and that would flood the valley to the point where it would spill around the other side of Observation Mountain. Bypass channels. And this was looked at initially to see if there was some sort of flood bypass that could be built basically from the south side of Johnson Flats across to the Edwards Road area. And the answer to that is if you go out, if you've ever been tubing down that section, or if you can imagine driving up 2nd Street towards the airport, is the amount of material that would need to be moved is somewhere between 700,000 to 1 million cubic meters of material. So again, just the sheer volume of material, as well as the permitting, both provincial and federal, that would be required for establishing that sort of flood bypass, means a very expensive project and probably at least 5 to 10 years of construction after permitting. There are quite a few questions about the current dike in terms of looking at rebuilding it, beefing it up, why it was built there, when it was built, and that kind of thing. So it was built in response to another flood event back in the 70s. It was put there to protect the then residential industrial neighborhoods, similar to what it is now. And it was built to the standard of the day. So the reason why we're not considering just a direct rebuild of the dike in North Ruckle, if you remember the options from the introduction letter on the questionnaire, is because today's standard involves adding a bit more space for the river to increase in volume. So setting the dike back from the high bank so that when a flood does happen, it not only has a little bit more room to breathe, which lowers its velocity, but also allows for additional habitat protection, as well as just additional habitat during these flood events for the fish and other aquatic species. In South Ruckle, there's a question about shoring up the Black Train Bridge Trail, or just adding a berm along where there was that significant inflow of water. And the reason why a fully engineered dike is being considered as opposed to a berm is when we're looking at a solution that's going to last 100 years, we want to make sure we do it right. So do it once, do it right. Certainly a berm may help, but will it help to a 1 in 200 year standard? The answer to that question is yes, an engineered dike will do that. A berm may not. And of course, the big question, are we researching alternatives to the ones being proposed? So I want to hand this over to Graham to talk about the technical review that we did when the draft hydrology report was delivered.
Sure, thank you. Following initial kind of ideas discussion, Nadam submitted basically a conceptual draft, and on short order we brought together a team of experts, regional experts, actually some global expertise on it. So regionally, Alan Thompson, who's an engineer out of Nelson, who specializes in the impacts of dikes and dams and structures on stream function, on river function, how rivers flow, what happens to habitat. He's done a lot of work in the Kootenays in relation to hydro projects, and so he was in particular looking at that hydrodynamic kind of impacts. We had a review by Paul Davies, is that right? Yeah. Edmonds, sorry, not Davies. Paul Edmonds, who's for 22 years was a specialist in flood and disaster mitigation in England, and has since settled in southern BC, and has a particular expertise, having been the flood recovery manager for the 2012 floods in Wales, which had 22 different emergency operations centers and recovery operations stuff, so a major impact in a lot of rural areas. So he had really good insight about adaptation and land use options, comes from a planning background. Additionally, we had a couple other folks from history there.
Okay, I'm the non-technical guy. Okay, so we had Alan, we had Don Dobson, of course, we had Edmonds, we had a couple fellows from Urban Systems engaged, and they also happen to be the engineer of record for the city of Grand Forks, and we're already engaged in the floodplain planning piece. And then we had a gentleman by the name of Jeff the Ball, who, recently retired expert from the Ministry of Forest Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development. And he was for decades a boots on the ground flood management, dike management guy. So they all did the peer review.
Thank you. Yeah, so we spent about an afternoon with that, and then we then had a discussion with stakeholders, the Kettle River Watershed Authority representatives from the community through the operations team, and then there was technical memos that followed up from the reviewers as well. So a thorough kind of vetting of what those options were, helping refine and scope where they went.
Thank you, Graham. The next number of questions have to do with the decision the council is considering on September 4th. So I'm going to ask Councillor Thompson to answer some of these questions. And I know I gave it away, but the first question is, when is council planning to consider and make a decision on the flood protection options?
We're hoping to be able to make a decision and to release it publicly on the 4th of September.
So if anyone's marking their calendars, we'll be having another one of these large community meetings on the 5th of September at 6 p.m. and here again. And how much of the community input is being considered in your decisions as council?
We had informal meetings with each affected area 2 weeks ago, and we took straw polls to see what the flavor was from those that are affected. We have directed that a survey be sent out to all of those again who were affected in the areas, the North Ruckles, South Ruckles, and Johnson Flats. Is the business community being surveyed as well?
That's right, so downtown and the business
Downtown
community.
business community as well. Those surveys are due back to the city by the 24th of September, or August, pardon me, that will allow our staff and the recovery team to put together the findings. This is your opportunity to have input into what we are doing, what we ultimately decide to do. And the decision, we are very well aware, is not going to please everybody. There are going to be some that are very angry with the decision that we might make. There are some that may be very pleased with the decision that we make. But we will be making a decision based on the survey responses and what we as a council feel is in the best interests of those affected communities and the community as a whole. Now, I know that having read on Facebook the minutes of the meeting that was held last evening, there are those that are wanting us to delay that decision until November. That is far too long. It's already going to be 4 months since this event happened. We have to get some funding in the city to assist those that have been negatively impacted. We want to ensure that your safety and health and all those things are paramount and looked after. And so that's why we, as this council, now there's an election in October, but I don't think it's fair to leave that kind of a decision with the new council, because they will not have had all of the information that this council does with which to make an informed decision. So I ask for your patience, I ask for your understanding, I ask more specifically for your responses to those surveys, because they are extremely important. We need to hear from you.
Great, thank you, Councillor. And what's the role of council in the bio program development?
What's the role of council in the bio development? We are advocating, and this is what, if the decision is to purchase your properties, we will be pushing to have those buyouts at pre-flood market value, in addition to whatever you may have expended to put in your homes so that you may or may be able to live in them now. There's also been concerns about any funding received from the DFA, and would that be taken away from any grant monies or purchase price that would be negotiated? And the answer to that is no. So if you've had DFA money and you have put that to use to make improvements to your home so that you can live in it temporarily or permanently, whichever decision the city's going to be going, and I don't want to presume the direction, but you don't have to repay that.
Thank you, Councillor. So for the bio program, what happens is, first of all, council makes a decision. That decision is brought to the province. And then ultimately, because we're talking about using provincial money, they would then endorse or propose an alternative and make a decision on the program. So what council does is they advocate for the interest of the people. So that's why they want to hear from everyone out here and everyone in town that's been affected, so they can take the message, the correct message, to the province for their decision making. So Steve, question here about the household, HEAP is, we'll go with that, the Household Emergency Assistance Program, and about whether the recovery team is going to take a request for an extension to the province.
Okay, so the HEAP program is that Canadian Red Cross program. We're just in the second of 3 phases on that right now. I understand the next phase, the third one's coming up in September. Well, already we know through a bunch of the outreach work and from talking to various residents here that there are some folks that are still going to have some challenges after the HEAP program expires. So we already a couple, 3 or 4 weeks ago, we made the province well aware of that. And we're reinforcing that with them, and they know. And I'm confident that at the end of HEAP 3, those people that are still have demonstrated need, there will be some solution for them. I can't speak to what that is because I don't know yet, but it could be a HEAP 4, or it could be something else from the province. We just don't know that at this point, but they're certainly well aware that that need exists.
Great, thank you, Steve. So that's the end of the list of questions that I jotted down from the notes from that meeting. So now we'll open it up to the floor. And actually, I've got another note. See, I wrote notes this time around so I'd remember everything. I wanted to talk a little bit about the survey before going to questions from the floor, because I imagine there could be quite a few questions about the survey from the floor. So first off, I'll acknowledge that we made a mistake in sending out the surveys. So specifically for North Ruckle, the initial batch of surveys that were sent out were sent to incorrect addresses. We have reissued those surveys, and that was done at only a couple of days after the first ones were issued. So to date, we've sent out about 340 surveys, and that's based on the address and information that we have. We know that didn't include everyone because you've told us. And so if anyone is looking for a survey, they should contact the Flood Recovery Center. And if you're looking for the phone number, there's our quick information sheets at the front there. If you're looking for a survey tonight, there's also surveys at the front. So one of the key things with the surveys is the questionnaire code. And so I do ask that if you are returning the survey without the cover letter, to please include the questionnaire code on the survey that you return to the city. You can drop them off at City Hall after hours in the drop box, which is off of 4th Street. But during hours, you can mail them to City Hall, or our preferred method is, if you can do them online, it saves us entering them for the tabulation of the data afterwards.